the cap is pretty tied into league revenues, right?
Yes, very much so. Something I don't know is how much lag time there is. So say next year they played at normal TV, but it was empty stadiums. Would that affect kind of the 2021 cap, or would they drag it out and it would affect more the 2022? But I did some back of the envelope calculations. If I said assume, the average amount of revenue they generate per fan is $120 per attendee of a game, and there's 10 games and 70,000 fans, and it came out to the impact on the cap was $56 million, which is just crazy to think about. We've gone from the cap increasing every year, 10 to $15 million. I think that's what people, early March when we were doing all these projections, that's what everyone thought would keep happening. And if it just all of a sudden next year dropped 50 million, it would be the weirdest free agency we had ever seen. And I looked at the numbers before this. The average cap space teams have in 2021 is about $50 million. So it would go to the average team has no cap space, and it's distribution. Some would have some, and some would be 50, $60 million over the cap and just have to purge their roster in a way we've never seen before.
And there isn't any stipulation in there like if league revenues fall, like everyone's contract gets cut. It's like you're stuck with what you have here.
Right. I mean, most players don't have guaranteed contracts. The CBA was just signed right before free agency started, and one of the big things that did was it boosted minimum player salaries, and people had thought that like we had so much cap growth that minimum salaries hadn't kept up, so they tried to adjust for that. But if the cap drops again, then it's kind of we get this point where the minimum salaries are higher while the cap is dropping, and it just would squeeze that money available for free agency even harder. And so I think it could just be, nobody knows, but it could be such a wild year in free agency next year. And it goes back to what if the Broncos didn't make a couple of these moves this year? How much will we be kicking ourselves for the guaranteed money we gave Glasgow when Connor McGovern only got 1 year of free agency? Because right now paying $12 million for a guard or $11 million for a guard like his contract calls for, yeah, that seems about right for a good free agent guard. But it could be next year a good free agent guard goes for $3 million or $4 million or something, and that we're going to really kick ourselves for doing that. But I can't stress enough, it's such an unknown, so many variables, so much that the league could adjust, and I think the NBA's talked about doing cap smoothing, so it's not a drastic cut, but a bigger one, and how all that would work. So
It also is just crazy because you talked about the CBA negotiations, and in there, the NFL is going to add another game in a couple years to make 17 games. And they also added another playoff team starting this year. And it was like, they were like, we just see an endless money pit, like where we could just do whatever we want and we'll make money. And it's like all of these sports leagues suddenly are realizing that how vulnerable they really are. Like, depending on how this goes, like, this could put leagues in ruin for years. Like, the NHL has to figure out a way to play playoff games basically because their cap would probably go in half. Like, I think they would lose half of their revenue if they don't play the end of the season in the playoffs.
And it's really, there's no precedent for this, and nobody knows whenever we come out of this, is there going to be pent up demand, or are people going to say, I lived without sports, I don't need to go as crazy as I did before. And the more I think about it, the more that seems likely is it's going to be people just forget about sports, and it's not like nobody's going to be a sports fan, but I think there just will be decreased demand for the product. And the NFL was at such a high bar that it's, any slight drop off, I think could have big effects. Because if you just look at like how much, the cap's grown from 120 million in 2011 to 200 million now, and so it's the revenues have almost doubled. And it's like football was incredibly popular in 2011. Like,
Yeah.
they squeezed so much money out of people and corporations and everything that like just a slight drop or drop on the fringes. They need so much more than just their core fans. They need it to be that like way of life, and they need all that fringe attention to keep their revenues where they are.
Well, and I think, one of the big concerns is, are people even going to want to go to large crowds? And like,
Oh yeah,
you and I will go in face masks if we have to.
right.
But
right.
we're in like the top 2% of people. Like we're dying to spend money to go into an arena and watch sports. But like most people aren't. And I think that and just like, as I was saying, we have enough drama in our life. And we thought we had enough drama with just the 2020 election. Like that was keeping me drama filled. And now it's like, I mean, I know that's going to happen still, but I'm not thinking about it all the time anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, the big tragedy of this is that sports is the thing that we usually use to cope, to bring us together.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't possible this time. One of my favorite books, it's called 56, is about Joe DiMaggio's hit streak. And something I didn't know until I read that book was the summer that the U.S. was getting into World War II. So the whole country was gripped by two things, World War II and Joe DiMaggio's hit streak. And like that, having something like that would be a huge relief. It's one of the reasons I want baseball to go forward, but it's not the same thing as being a fan. Like you can enjoy following something without like having so much invested. And I think that it is going to be hard for a lot of people to see the point of investing in things like that once this is all over.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in a recession.
I hope it's not too controversial of a comeback. If it's not that half the country thinks we shouldn't be playing any sports and half the country thinks we should be, and that it's just the subject of sports becomes controversial. If half the people think, why are you playing it in this environment, and half the people are thinking, no, we have to play it, and it can't bring people together because people just shut it out in that way.
College football is very worried about what happens. And there are scenarios here where college football programs either don't play football anymore. Like I think we might lose some college football programs, or I think that we could see some major conference realignment where CU's kind of on the bubble of this. But let's say that they don't get in like whatever the bigger conferences are. And so now CU is a football school, but it's a regional football school. So they play Wyoming, Air Force, CSU, UNC, those schools. And that's sort of their scope. And maybe they have one rivalry game a year and then they try to get into a bowl game. But like, this has been something that the college football has been worried about happening in the next decade. And now we're looking at on the table for maybe, 2 years from now. And that is like, I think that part of this is it's speeding up timelines on things where I think, yes, the NFL is worried about fan base long term, but now like that's being brought more to the forefront. I've thought that there's a good chance that Major League Baseball parks in the future will be closer to 20 to 30,000 seats instead of, 50,000 seats like Coors Field. I think that is coming up. And I think that like everything is unknown here. All we're doing is speculating, but it's crazy that this is sort of like accelerating concerns that we had about these leagues without knowing that like social distancing was something we were going to be experiencing.
And something I'll just add about the college football is the revenue sports of college football and college basketball is what funds all the non-revenue sports, all the track and cross country and golf and gymnastics and soccer and lacrosse and all those. And how hard will those be hit since football isn't bringing in the millions and billions of dollars of revenue? And will it just be sports scholarships or have to be cut drastically in those sports? Or and everything's getting hit so hard right now. Colleges are hit so hard right now, and so it's hard to find anything that's just not deeply affected by this situation and all the uncertainty around it.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking when we came on because you were joining Zoom for the first time, and I was like, Zoom's completely different than it was a week ago because their business jumps 20 times what it was. Like, even the good things, no one's just the same. Like, the places that are getting a lot of business are like takeout and hospitals and Zoom calls, and it's like these things don't have the capacity for what they're doing. So nothing is just like the same as it was before. So that's very weird.